This is Office Hours at Duke University. Today, the director of Duke's Nasher Museum of Art, Kimerly Rorschach, will take your questions. She'll be guiding us through the world of modern art, including the concurrent Nasher exhibitions of works by Pablo Picasso and Andy Warhol. Rorschach has been the Mary DBT and James H. Siemens Director of the Nasher Museum since 2004. She is also an adjunct professor in 18th century European art, museum history and theory, and art law. Under her leadership, the Nasher Museum opened in 2005. Now on view at the Nasher is Picasso and the Allure of Language. And opening next Thursday is the show Big Shots, Andy Warhol Polaroids. Everybody watching is invited to join this conversation. To ask Professor Rorschach a question, post a comment on the Duke University Facebook page, tweet with the tag Duke Live, or email live@duke.edu. Professor Rorschach, we're at your office hours, and up in New York this week and next, major art auctions are going on. Works by Picasso and Warhol are fetching millions of dollars despite a difficult economy. As an interested observer of these auctions, but not a participant, are there any works you are paying particular attention to as they are bidded on?
I think the auctions this week and next week will be very, very interesting, really in terms of the bigger trends. Where is the market going? What is it looking like now? It's been very, very volatile, as you would expect in this economy. But interestingly, the Impressionist and Modern auctions that just occurred in these past few days, great works have done very well, including a work by Picasso, Degas, Giacometti, have done very, very well, spectacularly well. But bidders are maybe a little bit less eager if the work isn't a great work. We'll see the contemporary auctions next week. There's an Andy Warhol painting of dollar bills, and we'll be interested to see how that work does. But I think great works that are in short supply, as they always are, will do well. And it's the less great works, the less well-known works, and fields and areas where there's really still a big question mark.
Professor Rorschach, we already have our first question. It comes by email from Troy, and he asks, I'd love to know what your most recent personal art purchase was and why you were inspired to buy it. Did you just like it? Was it important for your collection? Did it match the drapes?
Well, it's a great question because personal collecting is very, very different from museum and institutional collecting. I collect in a very small-scale way contemporary drawings. You have to focus on something you can afford, and in this economy, I haven't made any very recent purchases. But I buy just completely by instinct, things that I like, things that I'm drawn to, things that I see, looking in galleries and at dealers, whether it be New York, Chicago, Miami Art Fair, wherever I might happen to be. If there's something I'm interested in and that I can afford, which happens much less often, I'll be interested in considering buying it. I love drawings because they really show you the hand of the artist. They show you the artist's thought process. And again, they're much more economical than a painting or a larger finished work. So I really enjoy drawings, and that's what I'm drawn to. I don't really worry so much about the drapes. It's really more the personal connection with the work and the artist.
Now, Professor Rorschach, down here in Durham and at Duke, the Nasher Museum, of course, is presenting Picasso and the Allure of Language. One of the touchstone pieces for this exhibition is a collage made by Picasso using the calling card of the American poet Gertrude Stein. What can this one piece tell us about the overall exhibition?
Again, this is a great question. I'm glad you focused on this work because it's one of the smallest works in the exhibition, but yet one of the most important and quintessential. And it was among Gertrude Stein's personal papers that were left to Yale University. This wonderful little work of art was discovered. And it's actually based on the calling card of Gertrude Stein and Alice B. Toklas, her companion. And the card says Miss Stein and Miss Toklas. And the story is that Stein and Toklas came to visit Picasso. He was a young artist just getting started in Paris. They had gotten to know him, befriended him, and they came to visit him, and he was not home. And so, as was the custom of the day, they turned over the top right-hand corner of the calling card, as you can see in the image, and left it for him, and it meant, we came, but you weren't home. And he then took the calling card and made it into this wonderful collage, this wonderful work of art, which has the card collaged onto the surface of the paper. And also the yellow shape that you see there is actually a cigarette wrapper. And Alice B. Toklas was, kind of notorious as a chain smoker, so that maybe represents her. And then the dye, the black and white dye in the image may refer to games that they all played together, games of chance, or it may refer to the Toklas-Stein relationship, the kind of two sides linked together. But at any rate, this very personal little work of art was created. And then he went to visit them, the story goes, and they weren't home, and so he left this work of art as his calling card. And the other thing about it that's great, and you'll see other examples in the exhibition, is that it's a collage. And we all think of collage now as something, we do in kindergarten, and it's one of the earliest art-making activities. But it was not widely practiced. It certainly wasn't used in high art until Picasso had the idea of cutting out shapes from paper or using found objects like this calling card or the cigarette wrapper, pieces of newspaper, as he sometimes did, pieces of wallpaper, and pasting them down on a surface and creating a work of art out of it. That was something that was a great innovation by Picasso and his contemporaries, not something that had been really done at all before.
Professor Rorschach, let's bring Andy Warhol back into the conversation. And of course, next week, Thursday, November 12, Big Shots Andy Warhol Polaroids opens at the Nasher. What kind of connections might visitors make by seeing these two exhibitions side by side, works by Picasso and Warhol?
Yes, another great question. The show does open November 12th. Picasso's open now, but Andy Warhol opens 10 a.m. November 12th, and then there's also a public event 7 to 9 p.m. November 12th that people are invited to if they'd like to see the exhibition then. Well, both of these are great names, household names among modern and contemporary artists. Pablo Picasso, Andy Warhol, very well known. Really two very different artists, and I think that'll come through if you come and see both exhibitions. Both were tremendously inventive. Both were tremendously innovative. Both were extremely influential. But after that, I think it's more interesting to think about their differences, perhaps, than their similarities. Picasso, despite his incredible innovations, the way he broke up space with his cubist vision, the collages that I just talked about, all the things that he did, he very much was grounded in the classical tradition. He was taught to paint by his father in a classical style. There are many works in the exhibition that if you look closely, you'll see him referring back, maybe even to classical antiquity and then transforming it in a very new and fresh way. And he's not trying to hide that. He wants you to see that. He used traditional media, drawing, painting, sculpture, and so forth, and you'll see all those different manifestations in the exhibition. Andy Warhol, on the other hand, although he had artistic training, he began his career as a commercial illustrator, a kind of a merchandise designer and a commercial illustrator. He drew illustrations for advertisements and magazines, and then went into art making. And as we all know, he was very, very interested in mass media and the commercial world, and he really based his art on this, again, in just an incredibly innovative way. He took up the Polaroid camera, whereas most artists would draw sketches of people that they wanted to quickly record or use as the basis for a portrait painting, as many of these Polaroids were used. He took the Polaroid camera. It was quick, it was easy. He could capture his subjects as they, went about their lives or as they all socialized together, and he was really looking for that. His paintings, of which we have a few in the exhibition showing the relationship between the Polaroid as the preparatory study and the painting, he's not interested in brushstrokes. He's not interested in the materiality of the medium. He hides the brushstrokes. He uses silkscreen, again, another commercial technique, to produce these images, and he almost wants you to take them as commercial images at first glance. So there are many, many differences in these two artists, although I think, although the Picasso show is more of a survey and the Warhol not so much, I think you'll just be struck by the incredible inventiveness of both these great artists. You'll see why they're so justly famous.
Professor Rorschach, we have about 200 people participating in this office hours session. Everyone is invited to jump into the conversation by posting a comment on the Duke Facebook page, tweeting with the tag Duke Live, or sending email to live@duke.edu. We've got an email question here that comes from Betsy, and she says, Dear Miss Rorschach, I'm a junior currently studying abroad in Florence, Italy. The upcoming exhibit featuring Andy Warhol Polaroids seems as though it will provide truly unique insight into this artist's work. What do you think these Polaroids tell us about Andy Warhol's work that his paintings do not?
Well, I think, as I said before, I think we can think about these Polaroids as another artist would use a drawing or a sketch, as you know, let's try this out. Let's see how this looks. Let's use this as a study for a portrait. And you'll see a lot of different ways that he used them. In social settings, they really look like snapshots. The Grace Jones image that we're using for publicity a lot. Some of the other images of his friends and contemporaries, very spontaneous, you know, very interesting. Of Grace Jones, the composition is very dramatic and abstract. For the society portraits, as they're called, and we have 4 portraits of the Nashers, Patsy Nasher and her daughters, Andrea, Joan, and Nancy, in the show, along with their accompanying Polaroids, as well as other preparatory Polaroids for the society portraits. He posed his sitters very, very carefully. He had a certain way he wanted them to dress, where the clothes wouldn't be distracting. He made them up in a particular way, hair just so, pose just so, against a white backdrop. So there it was much more contrived, and then he took the Polaroid as an aid to his memory as he then would paint the portrait. Sometimes you'll see various poses that he was trying out with these people. So again, as you would do sketches of a sitter, let's see how it looks this way or that way. The women, interestingly enough, hands down. For the men, he'd usually instruct them to have one hand up in some fashion or other. We're not really sure why, but you can trace that. So think of the Polaroids as the preparation for the work. And these Polaroids were given to us. I should say just a word about the genesis of the exhibition. We received a gift of Polaroid photographs by Andy Warhol from the Andy Warhol Foundation in New York as part of a project where they're distributing these photographs to a number of university art museums across the country. And they really have not been shown or seen publicly. Polaroids are rather fragile. You can't show them all the time. They're affected by light. They've really been in the dark. But we were given a group, as was the Ackland Museum at UNC Chapel Hill and the Weatherspoon at UNC Greensboro. And we all got these wonderful Polaroids, but we thought, wouldn't it be even more wonderful if we sort of pooled our resources, made a great selection, and put together an exhibition that would be shown in all 3 museums? And that's what's going to happen. I mean, we're all adding our own twist to it. The Nasher portraits will only be shown at the Nasher Museum. But so it's a great range of his Polaroid work. You know, this is the history of how we came to have it. And they've really never been shown before. Some have been reproduced, but I think the person who asked the question, I think that's right. You'll have a great opportunity to study, you know, an enormous range of his work in a medium that, while we all know he did it, we maybe haven't been able to see very many of them.
Professor Rorschach, we have another question here. It comes by email from Sean, and he says, Hi, Kim. I'm always interested in issues of interdisciplinarity and intersectionality. I am a performing arts practitioner myself with great interest in the ways that the performing arts can be informed by visual arts literature, the academy, etc., and vice versa. Could you please speak for a bit on these intersectionalities and what we can do as artists and arts administrators to break free of the limitations of a discipline?
Yes, another great question. I think it's always exciting when you can get an interdisciplinary collaboration going. And, you know, sometimes it can be frustrating. I mean, we're all stuck in our own boxes and doing things a certain way, and it can be hard or, you know, frightening to break out of that. But it's great to try, and when you find one that works, it's very, very exciting. Just to give an example, for the Picasso exhibition, we had a great collaboration with the Carolina Ballet. Ricky Weiss, the artistic director of the ballet, loves to be inspired by the visual arts, and we invited him to choreograph a ballet, you know, based on the Picasso exhibition. He came up with a wonderful ballet called Picasso. He came over, studied the works in the show, chose certain works that he found particularly inspiring, and put together a sequence of 4 different dances based on 4 different works, and that was presented at the Carolina Ballet very successfully. And it was wonderful, you know, a new way of looking at Picasso, a way of stretching the medium of classical dance, and I think we all enjoyed it. And the benefits, besides the artistic collaboration and the new work created, are benefits in terms of marketing, in terms of getting an audience's attention in a crowded market. Gee, it's not just the Nasher who's interested in Picasso, so is the Carolina Ballet. They're really getting together here. Maybe I should take note. Maybe I should go see this. So there are all kinds of reasons why it's great to do these collaborations. They stretch you artistically, and they have other benefits as well in terms of, you know, the audiences of one art becoming more interested in the other art, so to speak. We also, I think, as a university art museum, are well positioned to engender and encourage other kinds of collaborations. We just had a meeting yesterday with a number of interested faculty members. We are presenting an exhibition next spring called Displacement: The Three Gorges Dam and Contemporary Chinese Art. Works by contemporary Chinese artists, and there's a ton of interesting work going on over there in the visual arts. So many great artists, very, very rich atmosphere. But a number of artists have expressed their feelings about the development of the Three Gorges Dam and all the changes that has brought about. And, you know, it's very interesting to look at some of that work. And, you know, we've thought about it in the context of contemporary art, and you know, one of the artists is coming to give a lecture, and I mean, we're doing all those kinds of things. But at this meeting were anthropologists and someone from the Nicholas School who's interested in, of course, in the environmental impact of these large-scale dam projects. And they really led us to think about a number of other potential program collaborations or ways that people in other disciplines, engineering, for example, might be interested in looking at this work and seeing something different in it. And I mean, art's great because art has a million different meanings. You know, every time you see it, you maybe see something new. It might be something the artist didn't even think of. I mean, there are many meanings contained in a great work of art. And so it really lends itself to this kind of interdisciplinary inquiry. And I think, as I'm sure the questioner knows, the challenge is just to get it going, just to kind of break out of our routines and get it going.
Professor Rorschach, you were beginning to speak about the Nasher's identity as a university art museum, and you said in the age of the public intellectual, the university art museum is newly relevant. So what would be some more examples of that new relevance?
Well, I did write that a few years ago in a piece I wrote called Why Do Universities Have Museums, which you can read on our website if you should be interested. But I think in a university context, again, there's a very exciting opportunity to collaborate with faculty members. One of the scholars on the Picasso project, whose vision was very instrumental in how it all came out, Picasso and the Allure of Language, exploring his relationships with writers and his own activities as a writer. Patricia Layton in Art History and Visual Studies was a key scholar who contributed to the catalog and to the thinking about that theme. We work with faculty members all the time in developing exhibition projects, and I think it gives the faculty member an exciting opportunity to address a broader public. And of course, some faculty members in some fields do that all the time, but others, and perhaps in art history more than many disciplines, don't have as much of that opportunity. And, you know, here you're speaking to a potentially very broad audience. It's not just the class that you're teaching who's got to listen because they're going to be graded. It's all the visitors, you know, the tens of thousands of visitors that will come to see the exhibition. The catalog needs to reach out broadly as well. And without compromising its scholarly content, it needs to be relevant to a broad cross-section of people. And in our most successful collaborations with faculty, the faculty members have really embraced and enjoyed this sort of broader stage that we're able to offer. And again, some people do this all the time, but for others it's a new experience, and it can be a very rewarding one. It's just a different sort of communication than some may be used to. And that's kind of what was behind my comment about the public intellectual. But I think we add a platform that's very interesting and challenging and productive for the faculty members that we work with.
Professor Rorschach, we have more than 200 people participating in this office hours session. Everyone watching is invited to jump into the conversation by asking a question by Facebook, by Twitter, or by email. We've got a question by email here that comes from David, and he says, you recently took a very public position in speaking out against severe cutbacks that have been proposed for the art museum at your alma mater, Brandeis University. Putting aside the specifics at Brandeis, here's a general question. Should a university facing a financial crisis ever be allowed to sell off assets from its museum to help pay for things like classes and dorms?
I think that these assets, as you refer to them in museums, need to be viewed in the same way that you would view, say, an endowment given to support the philosophy department or the School of Engineering or the law school, or you name it. I mean, it's given for a specific purpose that's agreed to in writing, and the university agrees to it. And, you can't just decide because money's a little bit tight or you're not so interested in philosophy or you'd like to shrink down the department to divert that to a different department or to a different purpose. You have to really go through a lot of legal hoops to do that, and you have to really, really, really have a good reason to do that. Works of art given to university art museums ought to be treated in exactly the same way, even if the paperwork doesn't look the same, even if the legal position isn't exactly the same. Deeds of gift are usually concerned with the previous ownership of the work, that the giver has clear title, that the gift is unrestricted to the university and the museum and so forth. But the donors really have the same expectation that if the university has an art museum, this gift is not going to be diverted to some other purpose. And I think that universities do have a moral, if not a legal obligation, if not a technically legal obligation, to really honor that, just as they would honor the intentions of any other gift. I almost hate to say this, but to be completely honest, I can see where if a university is so strapped, there's just no choice. I mean, it does have a broader educational mission. Its only mission is not to be an art museum. I understand that. If it decides it can no longer have a museum or no longer be in the museum business, very sadly, I can see a justification in making that decision. But I see no justification, if you're going to have a museum, in plucking assets out of it in that way, cherry picking when finances get tight, because you weaken the museum in such a fashion that it really can probably never recover. It can't attract other donors for fear that the same thing will happen. It looks as though the purpose of the gift is just ignored, and it's very, very crippling for the University Art Museum and for the whole institution. So I feel very, very strongly about that.
Professor Rorschach, the last question referenced Brandeis University, your alma mater, and you said that you trace your interest in art museums back to your freshman year of college. Can you talk about this development of your personal passion and your professional career?
Yes, well, I went to college like so many people, not really knowing what I wanted to study, not really having any idea. But I took a survey course in art history my freshman year at Brandeis, and I just loved it. I thought, this is for me. I loved the way it embodied history. I loved the visual aspect of it. I just loved everything about it and sort of never looked back after that. And because of the University Art Museum, the Rose Art Museum at Brandeis, there were many opportunities to do some museum work as an undergraduate, to see how a museum functioned and to be around real live works of art, not just slides and images, but actual works of art, to be involved in organizing exhibitions, in doing research on individual works of art. The museum director taught courses in the museum, as I do at Duke today, and it was absolutely a formative experience for me. And I went right on to graduate school in art history, with jobs in other museums, and leading me on to my career. But for that reason, the University Art Museum has always been so important to me. I see the potential of it. I know the effect it can have. I mean, I'm just one person, but one of my classmates is now a distinguished senior curator at the Metropolitan Museum of Art. Gary Tintero organizes all the fantastic modern and contemporary exhibitions at the Met. Another is Adam Weinberg, who's director of the Whitney Museum in New York. So, really, this was a training and a breeding ground for leaders in our art establishment today. But beyond that, I think, as we've already talked about, it's a great site for interdisciplinary learning across a lot of different subjects. And of course, the arts are fundamental, really, in any society, in any culture that we've ever known or even heard about. People have made art. And as part of a liberal education, we need to think about it. We need to give our students the chance to think about it. And all those things were very, very important for me in my education, and it was absolutely the University Art Museum that really opened all that up for me.
Everyone watching is invited to join the conversation by asking a question on the Duke University Facebook page, by tweeting with the tag Duke Live, or by emailing live@duke.edu. Professor Rorschach, we've got a question here by email that comes from Sylvia. She says, "Dear Professor Rorschach, I'm looking for advice on how to work in the museum art world. I graduated a couple of years ago with a liberal arts degree, but didn't take any art history classes in my undergraduate career. Since graduating, I am very interested in working in the art world. Where do I start? What advice would you give to someone choosing a career in the art world, but starting later in life? Thanks for your time, Sylvia."
Well, I'd say if you're able, a great first move is to do some volunteer work at a museum, if that's your objective, to work in a museum. And you may not be able to. You may have to work at another job. But if you are able, or you might be able to find an opportunity that would fit into your schedule, you could gain some very valuable experience in an art museum by offering yourself as a volunteer, kind of an internship, and many people get started that way. That will give you a sense of what the different jobs are, and it will give you some experience. When a museum is hiring someone, I mean, pretty much like any business, you want somebody who can come in and do the job. You want somebody who has the preparation and the experience. It is a handicap not to have studied art, because you're not able to prove or to show on your resume that you know about art if it's a museum job that involves dealing directly with the art, which may well be the kind that you want. But keep in mind that there are other kinds of jobs in museums, many other kinds of jobs: marketing, PR, the museum registrar, who keeps track of everything almost in the way a librarian would do and arranges the shipping and the logistics. There are jobs in education, where people who have an education background are very well positioned to work in museums, developing their K-12 programs and so forth. So, I mean, one thing might be to ask yourself, well, what do I have expertise in? What did I major in? If it was history, you might get started in a history museum. Science, you might get started in a science museum. An education degree, you might look at museum education departments. So think about the range of jobs in museums. If there's a museum that you're particularly interested in, look at the website, study the staff, think about trying to have an informational interview with someone that you think could tell you a lot about what goes on there. That would be very instructive. Then of course, there's the commercial art world, which is not my own experience so much, although we deal with that world. But there are art galleries in major cities and some in even smaller cities. Again, look around, visit some. If there's one that seems interesting to you, think about what you might do there. That experience, especially at the entry levels and the more modest levels, it's kind of all about sales and being organized, keeping track of things, keeping the inventory, and so forth. So there are a lot of different ways to get into it. I can't really advise you more without knowing your particular situation, but think as broadly about it as you can, I would say.
Professor Rorschach, coming back here to the Nasher and, of course, this exhibit that's coming up next Thursday, Big Shots, Andy Warhol Polaroids. This photograph of Grace Jones has become a kind of face for the exhibition. Why do you think that is?
Well, it's because we chose it, I think. We chose it as one of our PR images. We thought it was a great image, very striking, We love the sort of contrast between the brown of her skin color and the kind of magenta of the lipstick, the yellow scarf that she's wearing, and then the dark coat, and also the composition, the way she's kind of jutting in diagonally. It gives this great sense of movement, and it's just a very, very interesting image. And so that's why we chose it, and we've been using it all over, and I think that's why it's become the face of the exhibition. When you see the show, you may be more drawn to Jack Nicklaus or the young artist Jean-Michel Basquiat. There are other great faces too, but we had to choose one, and so we chose Grace Jones, and it seems to have made an impact, which is great.
Professor Rorschach, in speaking about the work of Andy Warhol, it can raise this perennial question of what is art? Warhol is someone who produced art by urinating on canvases and filming a man sleeping for hours. So you, as someone who addresses this question in practical ways when you select and curate exhibitions, what is your answer to this big question about the character of art?
Well, what is art? It's what artists make, and who's an artist? It's someone who makes art. I mean, it really is kind of a circular question at its most fundamental. But we look at work that we think is interesting and that moves us. And certainly in the case of Warhol, it's been decided, as it were, that he's an important force in the art world. He's part of history. His achievements have been studied and restudied. Warhol is one of the key figures in pop art. As I was saying earlier, someone who was very interested in mass media and commercial images and really pushing on that and kind of insisting that it's art. Really in the tradition of Marcel Duchamp or Dada artists who say it's art because I say it is. And, we can decide whether we accept that or not as individuals. And as individuals, I was talking about my personal collecting. It's just what I respond to emotionally. In an institutional context, you have a broader obligation. We're interested in bringing contemporary art to our audiences. Leading edge contemporary art. Warhol is firmly a part of history now. He's not current day leading edge, but he was leading edge in his day, and it wasn't so long ago. And many of the innovations that he undertook are still important to us today. Many, many artists are influenced by Warhol, not only by his photographic and interest in mass media, but by the films, as you mentioned, by the kind of amazing conceptual ways that he used film. And by the way, we'll be showing a few of the films in the exhibition. But, it's really up to you. What is interesting to you? What do you find meaning in? What helps you see the world in a new way? And different people are going to have different answers to that. But I never dismiss something just because it's described as, a black canvas or one line on a piece of paper or, a canvas that the artist urinated on. Well, let me see it. And, it might be really interesting. I'm going to take the artist seriously in terms of his or her intention. I'm going to look at the work. I'm going to learn about what the artist's project is and how that fits into it, and then I'm going to decide whether I think it's interesting or not. And I think my institutional responsibility is to bring those decisions, make them in a very informed way, informed by history, informed by contemporary practice more broadly, and try to bring what I think is worthwhile and what will resonate with a lot of people to broader audiences through the museum.
Professor Rorschach, you've been overseeing exhibitions at the Nasher for more than 4 years now, and I know it's probably like choosing a favorite child, but is there a show or two that really stands out to you as particularly compelling, satisfying, or appropriate to the Nasher?
Well, yeah, there are a lot of answers there. Just to talk about a few recent ones, of course. The El Greco to Velázquez show that we had last year, was a true blockbuster. It was incredibly beautiful, very important on a scholarly level, very difficult to organize, to negotiate those powerhouse loans, very expensive, very difficult to fund, but we had a tremendous response, and it was amazingly successful. So that was certainly a great moment. On the other hand, works by the old masters probably won't, over the years, be the major part of our program just because it's so difficult to organize those kinds of exhibitions, especially when you're a museum who doesn't have those kinds of works in its own collection, so that you can't organize the trades that are necessary to negotiate the loans. The Barclay Hendricks exhibition that we did last year really stands out to me. A great artist, starting as a painter of portraits in the 70s, was known in the art world, but we felt hadn't received the broader public recognition that he deserved. A lot of young artists admire him and are interested in his work. Our curator, Trevor Schoonmaker, felt the time was right to show his work. We organized this exhibition, hugely successful, is still traveling to 5 museums all across the country. It's in Philadelphia right now. It was featured on the cover of Art Forum magazine, leading magazine in the world for contemporary art. So we're very proud of that one as well. A previous show called Street Level, focusing on the work of 3 emerging young artists, Mark Bradford, William Cordova, Robin Rhoda, all of whom have gone on to much greater fame and acclaim. But, we showed them here early on, and it was a great show, and our audiences loved it. And we didn't even plan for it to travel, but various other museums wanted it, and so we allowed it to go. But all those exhibitions have been very, very successful. El Greco, I didn't even mention, was named number 3 of the top 10 2008 exhibitions by Time magazine. And again, the scholarly work was done by our senior curator, Sarah Schroth. So we're really very proud of those. But the Picasso, the Warhol shows upcoming this spring. I can't talk about them all, but an amazing shows coming up next fall that just unbelievably great. We've really had a lot of success in our exhibition program, and we're very, very proud of that.
Professor Rorschach, we have a question that follows right on what you've just been talking about. Anyone watching is invited to join in by Facebook, by Twitter, or by email. Send your questions. And the question here comes from Kristen by email, and she says, Kim, with El Greco and Barclay Hendricks in 2008 and Picasso and Warhol in 2009, what's on the books for 2010? Cheers, Kristen.
All right. Since there's a question about it, I'll feel free to carry on in that vein. Next fall, which will be our 5th anniversary, we really have 2 unbelievable exhibitions. Opening about the time that school starts is a contemporary exhibition called The Record, again organized by Trevor Schoonmaker, our curator of contemporary art. Works by a large number of international contemporary artists who've been inspired by records, by vinyl, by the materiality of the LP or of the record. There's a real nostalgia for records now, as you may know. The CD is just not as satisfying in terms of a format for art, the liner notes. You miss all that. Music you can download from the internet, but there's a real interest in records, a renaissance in sales. Young artists are pressing records more and more. And a lot of visual artists have been inspired by this cultural phenomenon, really, of the record. Going back to people like David Byrne of the Talking Heads, who was trained as a visual artist. There'll be work by him in the show. Christian Marclay, whose work Video Quartet we showed earlier this year, some of you may have seen, and who's been very inspired by records and music and all the work that he's done. He'll be featured in the show, and a lot of great younger artists, Dario Robledo, William Cordova again, the list goes on, but great interdisciplinary opportunities there with music, broader outreach opportunities with the music scene in our area, and we're very, very excited about that exhibition. Then opening about a month later in September, an exciting international collaboration on British modernist art, what was going on in England about the time that Picasso was inventing Cubism in Paris. And the answer is a movement called Vorticism, which is not well known in this country. The artists aren't so well known, although the poets Ezra Pound and T.S. Eliot were also associated with the movement, and they, of course, are well known here. But we're going to be showing the artwork of this movement for the first time. Very exciting. Push to abstraction, interest in mechanized forms, all kinds of great things. And our partners in organizing this exhibition are Tate Britain in London and the Peggy Guggenheim Collection in Venice. So really our first major international collaboration, an exhibition that will be shown first here at the Nasher Museum, traveling on to Venice, and then ending up in London in 2011. So we're very excited about both of those projects, and we're working on a lot of interdisciplinary programs to go along with both of them. And the Vorticism exhibition, I should mention, the lead curator there is Mark Antliff, who is professor here at Duke in the Department of Art History, and Visual Studies. So again, an opportunity that we were able to capitalize on because of our colleagues' great scholarship.
Professor Rorschach, we have about 225 people participating in this office hours session. Everyone is invited to jump into the conversation by posting a comment on Facebook, Twitter with the tag Duke Live, or sending an email to live@duke.edu. Professor Rorschach, we have naturally been talking mostly about art and artists, but as someone who curates exhibitions, you also have to worry about the authenticity of artworks and the ethics involved in their acquisition. Can you talk through some of those issues?
Yes, I mean, those are certainly very pertinent and very complicated issues. I mean, for the question of authenticity, it doesn't come up so much with contemporary art, of course, although it does with older art. And, you know, in the realm of the old masters, I mean, things do get reattributed, and we thought it was by Rembrandt, but now we're not so sure. And, you know, a committee of the 100 smartest experts can't even make up its mind. So it can get very complicated indeed. And you certainly want to make sure you have the advice of the leading experts when you're organizing an exhibition or contemplating a purchase. You know, it says it's by El Greco, but, you know, who says so? And can we trace it back to the artist's studio? Probably not, because that was a long time ago. You know, is it included in major catalogs of his work? When did it first come to light? I mean, you ask yourself all those questions and you research them as carefully as you can. And, you know, we don't purchase old master paintings or paintings by Picasso, but if we did, there would be a lot of money at stake, and you want to satisfy yourself on those questions as best you can. And works from antiquity, there's a problem with fakes, and there are ways to investigate that. But you can't always be absolutely certain, and you just have to use your expertise and your best judgment. You use a combination of what we call connoisseurship, just kind of looking at it, you know, using your visual memory and your knowledge of art to see whether you think it looks right. But you also bring to bear technical and scientific methods that can help date the materials or see if there's another, you know, painting under the painting that appears on the surface, or you might be able to look down and see how the artist prepared the canvas or what sort of preparatory painting is there. And if that seems very characteristic of the way he usually worked, you'll feel a lot more confident than if it's not. So you use a combination of methods, and, you know, there's no one way you do it. It depends on the artist, and it depends on the question that you're trying to answer, and you know, what the issues are. But you do have to be careful about that, because yes, indeed, there are lots of different kinds of reproductions out there, and you would never want to be presenting a reproduction as an original. I mean, that really is an ethical question. And then there's also the question of provenance, as we call it, the history of ownership. And the two kind of hot spots here are, you know, is this a work that could have been in Europe in the World War II period, in the period of Nazi ascendance? Because if it is, we need to try to satisfy ourselves that it was not seized by the Nazis from its rightful owner. And again, as many of you know, the Nazis did seize artworks from people and institutions all over Europe. Hitler was very interested in art. He had been trained as an artist himself. He had a vision for a grand museum of Germanic art and the kind of art that he liked, that he would build at the conclusion of the war. And then the kind of art he didn't like, modern art, degenerate art as he called it, he sold abroad for currency to conduct the war. So he seized art from many, many people, including, of course, many Jewish collectors. After the war, there was a tremendous effort made by the Allied countries, and on the American side, many museum directors served as officers and were involved in this. There was a tremendous effort to return this art to its rightful owners, but often its rightful owners were dead. And so an effort was made to return it to the country from which it came. But in these post-war years, not everything was able to be returned. Things came on the market and were sold, and a lot of things came into American collections and indeed into American museums. And so we're involved in an ongoing way trying to make sure that everything we own, doesn't have some lingering problem of transfer there. And anything we're presented with as a gift or a purchase, we would try to trace it back to make sure as best we could that there wasn't that kind of problem. So Nazi era provenance is one big issue that we have to be concerned with. But it's just not so easy to know. You cannot go down to the courthouse and do a title search on a work of art. It can be very, very difficult to find out where it was, during this year and that year, and to trace it back. So it's a challenge, but we have a responsibility to really look into that as best we can for works that we're acquiring, works that we're showing, all the works that we deal with. And then the other big issue surrounds antiquities and archaeological materials. Again, as many of you know and have read about, I'm sure, in the past, looting of archaeological sites went on really almost as a matter of course. In times of war, it would go on. I mean, the Romans took from the Greeks to form their collections, and it's continued to go on. But in recent decades, we've become much more aware of this as a problem. The source countries are trying to do more to protect their sites, and they require our cooperation in not, feeding the market or being willing to buy things that have no history, that might have been illegally excavated and smuggled out of their country of origin. In such clandestine excavations, original evidence is lost. We don't know. We can't say what site this came from if we're a thief trying to conceal the fact that we looted it. We're not going to be able to say where it came from. If it was in one layer or another layer that would help us date it, that would all be destroyed and not recorded. So a lot of information is lost when this looting goes on, and we as museums try not to be a part of that, even if in the past it wasn't really worried about, it wasn't really thought of. We need to think about it now. We need to worry about it now. We need to be very circumspect about the works that we acquire. We need to know where they came from, when they left their country of origin, and we need to make sure that we're not dealing with anything that was looted recently, because we just don't want to encourage that. There too, it can be very difficult. Things don't always come with a nice, clean history, or if they do, you have to almost question it and wonder if it's authentic. So it's an ongoing challenge to research these works of art. But they're small, they're portable, they're valuable. They've changed hands legally and illegally over the years. And how do you deal with that now when you're confronted with an object that you're being offered to buy or as a gift and so forth?
Professor Rorschach, we've got one more question here from an Ingrid, who asked if you have any favorite art blogs that you check out.
Not so much. I should be more on top of what's happening. Of course, the Nasher Museum has a wonderful blog, and that's one of my favorites. I tend to look at Culture Girl. That's a good one. The Arts Journal that comes out every day, and blogs that are associated with it. I would certainly recommend those. And of course, the New York Times and things that it leads you to. I mean, the New York Times pays a lot of attention to arts and cultural reporting, and so that's a good portal to some interesting blogs. But other than the Nasher and Culture Girl, nothing in particular comes to mind.
Great, Professor Rorschach. In wrapping up here, we can note that this is the beginning of the Duke Arts Weekend, and so there's going to be many student artworks and performances on display here on campus. So advice to a young artist who is beginning to tiptoe into the world of modern art. What sort of advice would you give to the aspiring young modern artist?
Gosh, well, it's a challenging career to take up. There's no question. But just be true to yourself, as true as you can. Do what you have to do what you're compelled to do, make the work that you're compelled to make. Understand, though, that it's going to be challenging. The way to tremendous success is to have representation from a very good dealer, but very good dealers are besieged by artists and they can't take them all on. So that's the sort of gatekeeping challenge right from the start. But get the training that's as great as you can get. Pursue your vision, be true to yourself, do what you have to do, and learn to promote yourself. Learn about the art world, learn about, how collectors operate, who they go to for advice. And, if you want to be part of it, which is fairly necessary in order to make a living, although one could argue that there are many different art worlds. But, learn about the art world that you want to be part of. Learn about the way all the different parts of it connect and how the commercial aspect of it it takes place. And think about how you can be part of that. But be true to your artistic vision and work hard. There's some great works over in the Bryan Center. I was just over there looking at them, and I look forward to the weekend.
Professor Rorschach, thank you for holding these special online office hours. We encourage everyone to come to the opening of Big Shots, Andy Warhol Polaroids, next Thursday, November 12, from 7 to 9 p.m. at Duke's Nasher Museum of Art. And you're invited to come back here to Duke's Ustream channel next Wednesday, November 11 at 7 p.m. Eastern for the online book club Duke Reads. NPR's Frank Stasio will be in conversation with Duke professor Ranjana Khanna discussing The White Tiger by Aravind Adiga. Details at dukereads.com. To learn more about Duke, visit duke.edu.